And I've often said that people of color don't need saving, they need opportunities. That's what they need, opportunities so that they can be able to use whatever they have within their grasp to take the next step.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented. Represented.
We all know first impressions count. Yet, rather than putting their best foot forward, most big-hearted, well-intended coaches are unknowingly starting their relationships with their prospective Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color clients off on the wrong foot by making statements such as the following. No, 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 no. Where are you from originally? Wow, your English is so good for a Black person. Your skin tone is not dark enough. Are you sure you're from Africa? We have a scholarship program to support people just like you. These subtle yet gut-punching microaggressions can feel like death by 1,000 cuts for a person of color as they are continually reminded they don't belong. That is why I've put together a training called Microaggressions 101, where I help you to understand how to hold safer spaces in your online coaching business that will see you serve a wider and more racially diverse audience. For instant access, head over to anigishuru.com/LT. That's anigishuru.com, gichuru.com/LT. The LT is for live training, and you can find this link in the show notes. Hey, welcome back. And today we are building on the allyship discussion we've been having for the last couple of weeks or so. I thought I'd share about white saviorism and kind of unpack that for you in what will be a little bit of a mini lesson, a mini masterclass, because it often gets in the way of genuine allyship. And honestly, a lot of white folks don't even realize when they have switched gears and are being white saviors. And so, what is white saviorism? It's a pattern where white individuals assume the need to rescue or save people of color, often without considering the perspectives, the voices, or needs of those they aim to help. This can inadvertently perpetuate paternalistic attitudes and reinforce existing power dynamics rather than genuinely empowering marginalized communities. I feel as though a lot of times white saviorism tends to come from a place of wanting to do good. It is not coming from a place of, I am doing this so that this person it's all about me. I think that it comes from a place of, I've seen so much harm, I've seen so much inequity. What can I do? How can I step in? How can I even use my white privilege for good? And so you're stepping in and coming in. But in the process, you end up becoming a white savior instead of an ally who is walking hand in hand. And that's what I want to unpack today and explain the difference between being a savior, who is somebody who's coming in and saving the day, as opposed to being an ally who is, picture this, locking arms together and walking step by step, hand in hand together. And so I want to give you some examples of white saviorism, because it's one thing to hear a definition of what it is, but I believe that when you hear examples, then you're able to better understand and point out and see, oh, that's what I've been doing, or that's what I see happening, and it doesn't quite sit or feel good. It ends up being something else altogether. And so, examples of white saviorism, number one is volunteerism. And whilst there is nothing wrong with volunteering, in fact, it's such a good way to understand and be part of a community and see what they're experiencing, there is a way in which it is done where it is not of benefit. For example, traveling to developing countries or the global south to volunteer for short periods of time, often in roles such as a teacher or building projects, being the leader where you're telling people what to do without considering the long-term impact or sustainability. This can sometimes cause more harm than good, because it may take jobs from local workers. And also, and this is where I see most of the issue, create a dependency where people are looking to those who are coming from developed countries, so to speak, to come and tell them what to do, because they're living in poverty. They're living in situations where they want to get out of, and they want to be in better situations. So they're looking to this white person who's coming in, who's better off. They want to do better. They want to be in better circumstances. And so they become very dependent on what you have to say and don't think for themselves. And whilst there is a value in volunteering, where you can actually make a difference is going in and understanding what their problems are, going in and working hand in hand, being with them, understanding their way of life, and in that process, seeing perhaps the gaps and the areas where they could do better. And the key word here, my friend, is collaborating, coming together, and not you being that teacher, that leader, that person who's the project manager who is telling without even understanding what the problem is. And that is why when you are there on the ground, hands in the work, it is so important to take the time to understand their problems instead of coming with your knowledge of where you come from and trying to implement what is working in developing countries, or rather, what is deemed as developed countries, what's working in the West, and bringing it to communities and villages and trying to implement that. And in some places, it doesn't have that long-term impact or sustainability. Number two is public display of charity. Posting extensively on social media about helping individuals from marginalized communities, for example, feeding the homeless, helping at a shelter, being photographed with children who are half dressed, they are just being swamped by flies, and you're there in the middle and you're taking this photo. And what this then does is that it is gaining praise and recognition for you rather than focusing on the individuals being helped. This shifts the focus to the savior's actions rather than the needs of the people. I have seen this happen a number of times where the focus is on, wow, you are such a good person. You went to Africa. You did this for the African children. You helped build this. Look at you. And whilst this might be coming from a place of you're posting this to raise awareness, there are better ways in which you can do this where it's not centering you, the white person, but rather it's centering that community and what you've been able to do when you've locked arms together and collaborated and done something. Point number 3 is really going to illustrate this even deeper when you get to understand how to do this. So, the mistake again that I see, and an example of white saviorism, is speaking for marginalized communities, taking the lead in discussions about racism or social justice issues, speaking over or for people of color instead of amplifying their voices. This can silence those who are directly affected and need to be heard. And so when you take that lead, when you're speaking on their behalf, that really does take the focus away from them rather than letting them speak using their language and them telling their stories instead of you telling their story on their behalf. And there are ways in which, of course, your white privilege can play a role. And maybe I will do an episode where we unpack white privilege. And I know it's a sticky subject where white folks feel like, well, I don't have white privilege. I don't know why you, there's always this directed conversation around white privilege. I've worked really, really hard to get to where I am. And so white privilege doesn't quite sit well with me. But I think we need to have an episode where I unpack that for you, for you to better understand and see, oh, this is what white privilege means. And I have it. How can I use it as an advantage to help others, but in the same token, not be a white savior? And so when you come in and you're speaking for marginalized communities, the example here of where you can do better is using your platform rather than amplifying your voice and being the voice. It's like you listening to this podcast right now. It is on a particular platform, Apple, Spotify, wherever you're tuning in from. The amplification is not on the platform. The amplification is on the lesson that I'm giving, the story that I am telling, the point that I am trying to put across. That's what's being amplified. And so, in this case, rather than speaking for marginalized communities, how can you amplify their voices? Number 4, tokenizing friendships, highlighting friendships with people of color to demonstrate one's own open-mindedness and tolerance. And this can feel very exploiting, and it can reduce the friendship to being a symbol rather than valuing them as an individual. And I've often seen this perhaps on social media where somebody may have said the wrong thing. A white person has said something that has caused discomfort. And in order to bring things into equilibrium, they will tag their Black friend and say, hey, such and such is a friend of mine. In fact, I've been the godparent of their children, and I've known them for years and years and years. They were a bridesmaid at my wedding, and so on and so forth, to signify that they are really true friends, but sometimes that can come across as tokenizing. And so again, that's an example of white saviorism. I'm going to take a short break, and when I come back, I'm going to share 3 more examples with you.
I joined Annie Gisharu's represented course because I wanted my wedding business to be more aligned with my values, particularly my values around racial inclusion and diversity. And I felt that in order to actually do this, it would be really great to unpack my experience of being adopted into a white Australian family in the late 1980s and growing up in a small country town in Victoria, and how that has shaped me, because essentially that has shaped how I have run my business. The course was incredible. It was absolutely amazing. Some of the biggest takeaways would be learning about microaggressions and implicit bias and white privilege. I'm in this really interesting position where I have a lived experience of a person of colour, and I also, like, while I'm not white passing, because I was adopted into a white family, in some communities that I am a part of or have been a part of, I kind of got a free pass. So it's a really interesting and complex space to inhabit, and learning how to inhabit that space has been so transformative for me, and I couldn't have done that without having done the represented course. That transformation has in turn transformed how I lead, how I interact and relate to my clients, how I nurture those relationships, and it's had an incredibly wonderful impact on the kind of clients I'm attracting in the first place. So if you're thinking about joining the course, I encourage you to take that leap, and it creates a very safe container. You will be able to bring anything that you want to the table, and you won't have to fear being judged.
Welcome back. So, example number 5, assuming the role of expert, offering unsolicited advice or solutions to people of color about their own experiences with racism and marginalization, assuming that one's own understanding or perspective is superior. This diminishes the lived experiences and expertise of those directly affected. And I see this happening particularly to those who have been doing racial equity work for some time, and they feel as though they can educate others. And please don't mistake this by assuming that now you have to be quiet, that now you are muted and listening. And when you see racial inequitable experiences or witness something that you can't speak up. No, that's not what I'm saying. But this comes to when you're dealing with people of color and giving them advice, or maybe you should do this, or maybe you should do the other, and trying to give them solutions. And I've often said that people of color don't need saving, they need opportunities. That's what they need, opportunities so that they can be able to use whatever they have within their grasp to take the next step. And that could be opening a door for them. That could be mentioning their name in a room that they may not have the opportunity to be part of that room or part of that table or part of that conversation. There are ways in which you can be supporting, but not being that savior. Number 6, savior narratives in charity. So, organizing charity events or initiatives where the emphasis is on the benefactor's generosity rather than the needs and dignity of the recipients. This can create a dynamic where the giver is seen as heroic and the receiver is seen as helpless. And I think we see this a lot in the advertisements for different charities where the focus is on that particular organization. You know that organization, you know that logo, and you see them as the people who come in and they save the day. And I feel that the work of charity and sharing and even getting people to donate can be done in a much more powerful way, going back to not speaking for marginalized communities and that public display of charity that I mentioned in point number 2, and just really doing it in a more collaborative way, in a more, we've locked arms together, this is what we're doing, and having the focus squarely on that particular community and the things that they're facing and the ways in which people can come together and support them telling their story and not you coming in and the focus being on, wow, look at how generous you are. Look at how much you've given and the good that you're doing. We all get lost on what you've done and not really on the issue at hand. Number 7, disregarding local solutions. So, implementing solutions or projects in marginalized communities without consulting the community members or considering existing local efforts. What have they already been doing on the ground? And this can lead to ineffective or unwanted interventions that do not address the actual needs. There's this example that I came across a number of years ago where white folks had gone into a village where they needed to build a well for water. And this community used to travel many, many miles to go and collect water from a river. And so the white folks came, they found a source and they were able to build a well very, very close to the village itself. It didn't require them to travel very far. But even with that well being available and having the clean water and everything that anybody looking from the outside would go like, this is such a great solution, the people in the village were not using that well. The reason behind why they were not using that well is because it was in a place where it had spiritual significance. There are people who had been laid to rest there, family members, and it was a space that was sacred. And so this group of people had come with very good intentions, white savior mentality, going like, well, why haven't they just built a well here? We'll just dig up here and we will plant a well here. And it just never got used. So again, this is disregarding local solutions. It's disregarding or having even an understanding of what's happening on the ground and coming in and really having ineffective and unwanted interventions that do not actually address the actual needs and creating bigger problems. So I hope those examples that I've shared with you have allowed you to have a deeper understanding of what white saviorism is and potentially how you can go about to collaborate rather than coming in and saving the day. Now, if this is work that you want to dig deeper into, you're like, Annie, you've scratched something here and there's an itch and I want to go deeper. I'd love to invite you to consider joining us inside my signature program, Represented, where we go deeper on this matter to do with white saviorism and many, many other things. And you do this in a group of other like-hearted human beings where we are able to dig deeper and together we're able to do better. If this is of interest to you, the next round will be in September, and you can get on the wait list. To find out all the details, head to anigishuru.com/represented, and all the details will be in the show notes.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented.